The air in the living room felt thick, heavy with the smell of sizzling latkes and the low hum of family chatter. It was the annual Hanukkah celebration, a night I always poured my heart into. This year, I'd spent weeks crafting a new story, a way to explain the deeper meaning behind each night, something beyond just the oil and the Maccabees. I'd practiced it, rehearsed it, filled it with pieces of my own history and hope. As I finished, a hush fell over the room, and I saw a few teary eyes, a few quiet nods. It was exactly what I'd hoped for. Then Sarah, my cousin, stood up. She clapped slowly, a mocking, deliberate sound that cut through the warmth. Her smile was thin, almost a sneer. "Oh, that was something," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Honestly, darling, it's a bit much, isn't it? All that dramatic flair for a children's story. It's just childish nonsense." She laughed then, a sharp, dismissive sound that made several people shift uncomfortably. My heart dropped, not just because of the words, but because of the way she said them, as if my effort, my passion, meant absolutely nothing. This wasn't just an insult. It was a public unraveling of my contribution, a calculated dismissal of my heritage and the effort I'd put into sharing our traditions. It felt like she was spitting on everything I held dear about Hanukkah, about our family, about me. I didn't yell, I didn't even flinch. Instead, I just looked at her, really looked at her. My gaze was steady, unwavering. A silent promise passed between us, a knowing glance that said this wouldn't just disappear. What she had done, the way she had done it, would not go unaddressed. It was a subtle thing, almost imperceptible, just a slight, slow nod of my head. It wasn't a nod of agreement, but one of understanding. Understanding that a line had been crossed, a boundary shattered. For a split second, I saw it. A flicker, barely there, of something like uncertainty in her eyes. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, but I caught it. It was the smallest crack in her usually impenetrable facade, a hint that my calm reaction, my lack of outward anger, had unsettled her. She probably expected tears, a fight, something dramatic. But I offered her nothing but that quiet, steady gaze. It was a moment that spoke volumes without a single word. Some lights, once dimmed, can never truly be extinguished. They just find a different way to burn. I turned then, slowly, deliberately. I didn't say goodbye, didn't offer another glance. I just walked away, leaving her standing there, probably still trying to process my non-reaction. I could almost feel her unease, a cold sensation spreading through the room, replacing the warmth that had been there just moments before. The celebration was over for me. This was only the beginning of something else. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. My story, the one that led to that cold moment with Sarah, really began much earlier, in the bustling, vibrant streets of Brooklyn. I grew up in a close-knit Jewish community, where every corner seemed to hold a piece of history, every family gathering a lesson in tradition. Hanukkah, especially, was less a holiday and more a living, breathing entity. The aroma of sizzling latkes filled our small apartment, mingling with the sweet scent of sufganiyot. Our home was always packed with relatives, a cacophony of laughter, Yiddish phrases, and the soft, rhythmic prayers. The flickering light of the menorah wasn't just decorative. It was a beacon, guiding us through stories of resilience and faith. Every year my grandmother would tell the same stories, but each time they felt new, imbued with her warmth and wisdom. Those 8 nights were sacred, a time when the past felt as real as the present, and the future seemed bright with promise. From a very young age, I felt an almost magnetic pull towards our heritage. I wasn't just interested in the stories, I wanted to understand them, to feel them in my bones, and then, most importantly, to share them. I spent hours poring over old texts, listening to the elders, trying to piece together the deeper meanings behind the rituals. My dream was simple, to keep these traditions alive, to ensure that the flame of Hanukkah, in all its profound beauty, would never dim for future generations. This desire, this passion, was also my greatest vulnerability. It stemmed from a lifelong yearning for acceptance, for my voice to be heard, and for my contributions to be valued, especially by those I looked up to. And at the top of that list, for a very long time, was my older cousin Sarah. Sarah was always there, a constant presence at every family gathering, every holiday. She was older, prettier, and seemed to possess an effortless charm that I, as a somewhat awkward and overly earnest child, could only envy. In my young eyes, she was everything I aspired to be. But even then, there was a subtle undercurrent to her presence. It was never outright meanness, not in the beginning. It was more insidious, like a slow drip. She'd offer what sounded like compliments, but they always had a twist. "Oh, your drawing is so colorful," she'd say, her tone implying it lacked sophistication. Or, "You're so good at memorizing those prayers, aren't you? It's almost like you don't even have to think about them." Each remark, seemingly innocuous, chipped away at my confidence, planting tiny seeds of doubt. I remember one Hanukkah when I was about 10. I had spent weeks learning a complex prayer in Hebrew and was so proud to recite it. After I finished, Sarah ruffled my hair, smiling. "That was sweet," she said, loud enough for others to hear. "So earnest. But don't worry, you'll eventually learn the real meaning behind it all, not just the words." It was a dismissal, veiled as encouragement, a subtle way of telling me my efforts weren't quite enough, that I hadn't truly grasped the essence of what I was doing. Looking back, these moments were not isolated incidents. They were part of a pattern, a careful, almost unconscious way she had of always putting herself slightly above me, of ensuring I never quite shone as brightly as she did. It created an emotional landscape where my self-worth was constantly being tested, laying the groundwork for the bigger betrayal that would come years later. Her presence, always seemingly benevolent, was in fact a slow, steady erosion of my spirit, a constant reminder that I was always just a little bit less, a little bit behind. This dynamic, established so early, became the silent backdrop to our family life, shaping our relationship in ways I wouldn't fully understand until much, much later. The small, almost invisible cracks in our relationship, those tiny chips Sarah had made in my confidence, started to grow wider over the years. It wasn't a sudden break, but a slow, steady erosion, like water wearing down stone. I can pinpoint several moments, looking back, that added to this growing distance between us. There were the promises, for instance, that Sarah made and then easily broke. She'd commit to attending a significant family event, say, my high school graduation or my bat mitzvah celebration, only to call at the last minute with some vague excuse. "Oh, I have a last-minute work thing," or "I'm just not feeling well, darling." Each time, I felt a pang of disappointment, but I always pushed it down, convincing myself she had a good reason, that her life was just more complicated than mine. These weren't just personal slights. In our close-knit family, showing up for these milestones was a big deal. It was about respect, about family loyalty. Her repeated absences spoke louder than any words. Then there were the more subtle humiliations, the kind that stung precisely because they were delivered with a sweet smile. When I got into my first choice university, a big deal for me, Sarah made sure to mention it at the next family dinner. "Oh, isn't it wonderful that she got into that school? So brave of her to choose something different." The implication was clear. It wasn't as good as where her own kids went or where she herself had gone. She'd sometimes talk about my academic achievements, always in front of relatives, but frame them as if they were cute, almost naive efforts, rather than genuine successes. It was never a direct put-down, but always a backhanded compliment that left me feeling diminished rather than proud. She also had a knack for manipulating family dynamics. I remember a time when my grandmother was unwell, and I spent weeks helping out, running errands, keeping her company. Sarah, who lived further away and visited less often, somehow managed to be portrayed as the heroic, self-sacrificing granddaughter whenever she did show up. She'd bring a small gift, make a big show of holding Grandma's hand, and then leave, while I was left to deal with the day-to-day care. Relatives would praise her for making the effort, while my quiet, steady help went largely unnoticed. It wasn't fair, but I didn't know how to articulate it without sounding petty. These weren't isolated incidents. They were a pattern. She was skilled at making herself look good, often at my expense, and I was too eager for her approval to call her out. These seemingly small slights, these broken promises, and subtle manipulations were magnified by the environment we lived in. In our community, reputation and family honor weren't just abstract concepts. They were the bedrock of our social structure. Everything you did, everything you said, reflected not just on you, but on your entire family. So, when Sarah subtly belittled me, or when she neglected family duties, it wasn't just a personal slight. It was a chipping away at my standing within the family, a quiet undermining of my worth in the eyes of others. I began to feel like I was constantly defending myself, even when no one was directly attacking me. The initial betrayal, that public dismissal of my Hanukkah contribution, wasn't some random act. It was the culmination of years of emotional wear and tear, a final public expression of a dynamic that had been subtly playing out for decades. It felt like the last straw, the moment when all those small hurts finally added up to something too big to ignore. The emotional atmosphere in our family gatherings, especially around the holidays, started to feel heavy, almost suffocating. What used to be joyous occasions filled with laughter and shared stories slowly turned into a minefield. Sarah and I, once close, now orbited each other with a tense politeness that fooled no one. Discussions about family traditions, particularly Hanukkah, became the worst. I would share an idea, a new way to interpret an old story, or suggest a craft for the kids, and Sarah would subtly, almost imperceptibly, challenge it. She'd nod slowly, a thoughtful expression on her face, then say something like, "That's an interesting take, but isn't the traditional interpretation a bit more profound?" Or, "Oh, that's sweet, but are we sure it aligns with the original meaning?" It was never a direct argument, but her words always managed to cast a shadow of doubt over my contributions, making them seem less authentic, less valuable. I started to feel a growing pressure, not just from Sarah, but from other family members too. They weren't actively taking sides, not openly anyway, but their silence, their hesitant glances, spoke volumes. It was as if Sarah's long-established position as the family's unofficial cultural arbiter had given her an unspoken authority. When she dismissed my ideas, others would often just nod along or change the subject. No one ever really defended my interpretations or even acknowledged their merit. This left me feeling isolated, like my passion for preserving our heritage was somehow misunderstood, or worse, seen as a challenge to the established order she represented. I felt like I was constantly swimming against the current, my voice growing weaker with each subtle dismissal. Sarah's demeanor grew more pronounced, more overtly dismissive. It wasn't just the subtle jabs anymore. She started to openly patronize me, especially when I spoke about my passion for traditional stories and rituals. I remember a family dinner where I was excitedly telling a group of younger cousins about the deeper meaning behind the dreidel game, how each letter represented a different aspect of the Hanukkah miracle. Sarah, from across the table, interjected loudly, "Oh, do go on, dear. It's so charming how you still believe in those quaint little fables." Her tone was dripping with condescension, her smile a thin, cold line. The younger cousins, who had been listening intently, looked uncomfortable and quickly dispersed. It was a clear message. My efforts were childish, irrelevant. This period marked the peak of my emotional suppression. I would bite my tongue, force a smile, and pretend her words didn't sting. I told myself it wasn't worth the fight, that I was overreacting. But inside, a quiet rage was building, a slow burn that threatened to consume me. I remember another incident, shortly before the big Hanukkah celebration. I had spent weeks researching and preparing a presentation on the historical context of the Maccabean revolt, hoping to bring a richer understanding to our family's annual storytelling session. I was so proud of it, thinking it would finally show everyone, especially Sarah, that my contributions had real depth. When I mentioned it to her, her eyes glazed over. "Oh, that's ambitious," she said, without an ounce of genuine interest. "But really, darling, people just want to hear the pretty stories, don't they? All that historical detail can be so terribly dry." She then proceeded to tell me, in front of several aunts, how she was planning a much simpler, more accessible storytelling format, effectively sidelining my efforts before they even began. It felt like a punch to the gut. All my hard work, all my passion was deemed too much, too serious, too dry. It was a constant battle trying to assert the value of my perspective, only to have it repeatedly minimized by her. I was tired, so incredibly tired of fighting for my place, for my voice, in a family that felt increasingly dominated by her narrative. This was just before the breaking point, the moment when all those suppressed emotions would finally spill over. Then came the event that changed everything, a moment that shattered the existing dynamic between Sarah and me. We were at the annual family meeting, discussing the upcoming Hanukkah celebration. The conversation drifted to the dwindling interest in traditional Hanukkah storytelling among the younger generation. It was a concern many of us shared, but Sarah, ever the pragmatist, proposed a drastic modernization. "Look," she said, leaning forward, "we need to make it relevant. Forget the long, drawn-out histories. Let's just do a quick summary, maybe a video. No one wants to sit through hours of old stories anymore." Her words felt like a physical blow. She wasn't just suggesting an update, she was advocating for erasing the very essence of what I held dear, the depth and richness of our oral traditions. It wasn't about making it accessible, it was about making it superficial. I felt a cold dread spread through me, but before I could respond, another piece of information hit me. Something that had been hidden for years. My grandmother, bless her soul, had always cherished a specific menorah, a family heirloom passed down for generations. It was a beautiful, intricate piece, made of silver, with tiny engraved scenes depicting the Hanukkah story. She had always told me it would be mine one day, that I, with my passion for our heritage, was the rightful keeper. After she passed, I had assumed it was being kept safe, perhaps at my parents' house, but it never appeared. I had asked about it once or twice, but the answers were vague, always pointing to it being somewhere safe. The revelation came from my aunt, a quiet woman who rarely spoke up, but who had a keen eye for details. During a casual phone call, she mentioned seeing the menorah at Sarah's house, displayed prominently on her mantelpiece during a visit. "Oh, didn't you know?" my aunt asked, surprised by my silence. "Sarah told everyone Grandma wanted her to have it, said she was the most responsible one, the one who truly appreciated its value." My aunt went on to describe how Sarah had presented a letter, supposedly from Grandma, stating her wishes. A letter I had never seen, and one that now, in retrospect, felt utterly out of character for my grandmother, who always valued connection over material possessions. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening thud. Sarah hadn't just overshadowed me, she had actively manipulated my grandmother's wishes, fabricating claims to secure a cherished family heirloom that was meant for me. It wasn't just about the menorah itself, it was the blatant disregard for tradition, for my grandmother's true intentions, and for my own connection to our past. This wasn't a subtle slight, it was a calculated betrayal that went to the core of my identity and my family's legacy. The thought of her displaying it, claiming it as her own, while simultaneously trying to strip away the very meaning it represented, was infuriating. This act, this outright deception, coupled with her proposal to gut our storytelling traditions, pushed me to my absolute limit. The quiet rage that had been simmering for years finally boiled over. I realized then that I couldn't just stand by and watch her dismantle our heritage, piece by piece, for her own convenience or self-aggrandizement. The time for passive suffering was over. The time for polite smiles and suppressed anger was done. I had to confront her. I had to reclaim what was rightfully mine, not just the menorah, but my voice, my heritage, and my place within the family. This moment marked a critical shift. I was no longer just the quiet cousin who loved old stories. I was someone who had been wronged, and I was ready to fight for what I believed in. The story's trajectory had fundamentally altered. The decision to confront Sarah brought a strange mix of feelings. There was a knot of fear in my stomach, a cold dread about the fallout, the way families can sometimes turn on their own when old secrets spill out. I also felt a deep shame, a sense that by bringing this into the open, I was somehow disrespecting the family, breaking that unspoken rule about keeping disagreements private. But beneath all that, a powerful wave of righteous anger surged through me, a feeling of liberation I hadn't known in years. It was like shedding a heavy cloak. I was tired of carrying the burden of her manipulations in silence. The family, as expected, was thrown into chaos. My challenge to Sarah's authority, especially concerning the menorah and the traditions, wasn't just a personal spat, it was a public declaration. Our community valued unity above almost everything else, and this kind of open conflict was almost unheard of. Whispers followed me, glances were exchanged, and dinner conversations became strained. I could feel the weight of everyone's judgment, their discomfort with the disruption I had caused. But surprisingly, not everyone reacted negatively. Some relatives, the ones who had always been a little too quiet when Sarah spoke, started to approach me cautiously. My aunt, the one who had inadvertently revealed the truth about the menorah, became my staunchest, though still soft-spoken supporter. She told me stories of other times Sarah had twisted facts, used her charm to get her way, or subtly undermined others for her own gain. It turned out I wasn't the only one who had seen Sarah's manipulative tendencies. They just hadn't had the courage or the reason to speak up before. These small acts of solidarity, a shared look, a quiet word of encouragement, gave me strength. Then there were the others, the deeply traditional members of our family, the ones who believed that any internal conflict should be smoothed over, that the appearance of harmony was more important than the truth. They saw my actions as an unacceptable disruption, a threat to the very fabric of our family and community. They became temporary adversaries, not out of malice, but out of a rigid adherence to their own idea of order. They tried to mediate, to tell me to let it go, to forgive and forget. They spoke of respect for elders, even though Sarah was only slightly older than me. Their words, intended to calm the waters, only made me feel more isolated, more determined to see this through. The cultural emphasis on family unity, a beautiful aspect of our Jewish heritage, suddenly felt like a cage. The sanctity of tradition, which I cherished, now seemed to be used as a shield for Sarah's deception. The conflict was fraught with social implications. It wasn't just about a menorah or a storytelling method. It was about who got to define our heritage, who held the power to shape our future traditions. The psychological toll on me was profound. I barely slept, replaying conversations, preparing arguments, steeling myself for the next confrontation. But this toll also fueled my resolve. Each sleepless night, each anxious moment, solidified my belief that I was doing the right thing. I was fighting for more than just myself. I was fighting for the integrity of our family's story, for the true meaning of Hanukkah, and for the memory of my grandmother. This fight, as difficult as it was, became a necessary step in reclaiming not just my voice, but a part of our collective soul. The raw emotion of those days, the fear mixed with the fierce determination, slowly gave way to a clearer path. I understood that simply confronting Sarah wasn't enough. I needed to rebuild, to heal, and to truly reclaim what was lost. My journey of healing began with engaging more deeply with the community elders, those wise men and women who held the true history and spirit of our traditions in their hearts. I didn't approach them with accusations, but with a quiet dignity, presenting the evidence of Sarah's manipulations, not as a personal vendetta, but as a plea for the integrity of our shared heritage. I spoke of the true meaning behind the Hanukkah traditions, the resilience, the light and darkness, the importance of truth. It wasn't an easy process. There were many conversations, many cups of tea shared in hushed tones, many hours spent sifting through memories and old family documents. But slowly, steadily, Sarah's carefully constructed image began to crumble. The elders, who had always valued honesty and respect for tradition, saw the pattern in her past deceptions. They listened to the accounts of her broken promises, her subtle undermining, and finally, the truth about the menorah, confirmed by my aunt's quiet testimony and other relatives who now felt brave enough to speak up. The weight of their collective disapproval, more powerful than any loud argument, began to settle on Sarah. The family, after much deliberation and many tense meetings, made a decision. It was a quiet reordering, not a public shaming, but its message was clear. The responsibility of leading the Hanukkah celebrations, a role Sarah had subtly taken for herself over the years, was reassigned. More importantly, the heirloom menorah, the symbol of our family's enduring light, was rightfully returned to me. It wasn't just a piece of brass and silver, it was a physical manifestation of trust, of heritage restored, of a broken lineage repaired. That year, the Hanukkah celebration felt different. It wasn't just about lighting candles, it was about rekindling a spirit. I led the ceremony, my voice steady, my heart full. The stories I told were not just ancient tales. They were infused with a newfound authenticity, a deeper understanding born from personal struggle and collective healing. The community spirit was palpable, a warmth that had been missing for too long. There were new faces, young cousins, and distant relatives who had heard the story and came to support. There was even a quiet, almost imperceptible nod from Sarah, who sat in the back, her usual boisterous presence subdued. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a recognition. a quiet acknowledgement of a truth brought to light. As I lit the final candle on the 8th night, the flames flickered, casting long shadows and dancing lights across the faces of my family. I looked at the menorah, its polished surface reflecting the warmth, and I understood something profound. This wasn't just about winning a fight or reclaiming an object. It was about standing up for what I believed in, for the heritage that ran through my veins, for the untold meaning that emerges when tradition is cherished and defended. It was about showing that some lights, once dimmed, can indeed be rekindled, shining brighter for having faced the darkness. The true meaning of Hanukkah, I realized, was not just in the miracle of the oil, but in the enduring courage to keep the flame alive against all odds for generations to come.